Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to share my screen right now. All right. This is Inclusion 101, secondary edition. My name is Leela Jenkins. I work for the Florida Inclusion Network here. I represent 3 counties in the state of Florida, I serve 3 counties in the state of Florida, Duval County, Clay County, and Nassau County. And we are funded by the Florida Department of Education, Bureau of Exceptional Student Education. My job is to educate people on better ways to help and support students with disabilities in a gen ed classroom. So the next slide. This is our mission that we share with everyone that we present to, what our purpose is and why we exist to come out and talk to folks. We collaborate with districts, with schools, with families, and we work to provide very customized services and supports for students with disabilities so that they can have the same educational opportunities as their peers. I'm gonna front load this with my email in case you have questions as they come up as I'm talking. You please feel free to email me or jot it down. I will also have my email at the end. These are 2 email addresses just in case, just in case you need them both. My name again is Leela Jenkins. And so my emails are ljenkins4@fsu.edu and ljenkins@contactfin.com. Because we are the Florida Inclusion Network, we call ourselves FIN. My plan for this session is to give you an overview of what inclusion looks like, what you can expect for an inclusive education for your child, your learner, your student, whether you have a student with disabilities or a student without disabilities. These are my 3 objectives for this evening. I want you to understand how inclusive education supports students with disabilities. Give you some tips to identify if inclusion is working for your child, if that's the right setting, and then ways to support inclusive practices in your classroom or in your student's classroom. So if you're thinking about inclusion as a possibility for your learner, or if you're already in an inclusive setting and you're wondering if this makes sense for the future, we offer some guiding questions. Thinking about what you want in the long run, what you believe education should look like for your learner. So on the screen, you can see our 10 questions. I'm going to gently, quickly go through them to make sure that you can read them. These are questions to ask yourself, and I don't know your learners or your students or your children, and this is a personal thing that you need to think about what's right for your family. If it's important, is it important for your child to learn and play and work side by side with students without disabilities? Do you think that your child can benefit from a teacher that has high expectations of all the learners in the room? Does your child learn best when there's a variety of teaching strategies happening? Is it important for your child to focus on goals that are connected to their interests, their learning styles, and their future dreams, and their unique needs? Do you want your child to learn about things that are related to what their peers are learning right alongside them? Grade level standards and grade level testing and all of those grade level age appropriate things. Do you want your child to feel good about what they accomplish? Do you believe that there are peers in your child's school that can serve as good role models for the learning and the communicating and socializing? Is it important to you for your child to share tasks or solve problems and develop friendships with their peers? Do you want your child to learn strategies that will continue beyond graduation? And is it important to you that your child is able to prepare through their education, prepare for a successful and happy life, adult life, that's beyond education, that includes living and working and enjoying things, and socializing with other adults in the community? So those questions are things to consider if that's your goal for your children. These can be attained and developed through inclusive education. So before we get to the nitty-gritty of what it looks like and how you can support your student, I want you to understand where this is all coming from. This is the 101, the base level of inclusion. There's laws and there's research for the past 40 years that dictate and drive what we do as educators. So the laws are very specific in their the prioritizing of students with disabilities and planning for college and career ready and future, adult life ready. So it very clearly states that students with disabilities do not have to earn their way into a regular class setting with peers without disabilities. There's no checklist to make sure that a student with disabilities is okay to join a regular ed class. These are the two laws that say that. The law on the left is ESSA. It was passed in 2015. If you or you know of anyone that still says No Child Left Behind, that law was replaced with this one. ESSA stands for Every Student Succeeds Act, and it was passed 2 presidents ago. So the part here that we talk about at the Florida Inclusion Network is that all students are general education students first. All students must be taught to high standards. Student and schools must address the needs of those that are not meeting those high standards, and that universal design for learning supports the learning needs of all children. Universal design for learning is a way of preparing a classroom for all the needs of all the learners, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Um, ESSA is the law that is written for general education. It's gen ed teachers. This is what dictates what we do. And the law on the right is builds upon it, and this is IDEA. It's Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It was first passed in 1975, and this newest iteration was passed in 2004. This also says that general education must be the first placement considered by the IEP team, and that to remove a student is only considered if the needs cannot be met with with the use of the aids and services. And even when we remove a student from a general education classroom and put them in a more restrictive environment, the IEP team still plans for opportunities to include the student, whether that is recess or lunch or art or math, wherever that student it will thrive with their peers, that's where we want them. So those are the two federal laws that tell us that we are to include children to the best of our ability with the use of aids and services. And so I just said the term least restrictive environment. It's one of our many buzzwords in the education world, and we call it LRE sometimes. Least restrictive environment is about a student spending the time. Sorry, let me restate this. It states that to the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities must be educated with students who are not disabled. So the term maximum extent appropriate is where the IUP team is going to make the decision on what's appropriate, what's best for the student. And again, to double down on what I said a minute ago, it also says any removal of that student from their peers into a special class, a separate school, or removal in any way from the gen ed environment is only going to happen if the nature or severity of that disability is impacting their education, and an education cannot be satisfactorily achieved with the use of supplementary aids and services. So I know I've said that a couple of times, but that's how important it is that we're not removing children unless we cannot meet the needs and they need a more specialized environment or more restrictive environment. So inclusion allows for students with disabilities to get all the things to get the best practices, instructional methods, all those customized supports, um, everything that's based on current research with the gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher. They get two teachers, and I will also elaborate more on that in a minute, but they're with their peers without disabilities in a regular class setting. The federal government tells us that general education classroom is the first placement. And Florida said, okay, you're telling us to include, we're going to define what that means. We're the only state that at this moment, as I'm saying this, that has defined inclusion to give even more guidance to what it should look like. And this is important for you to know if you're in an inclusive classroom or if you're considering it. Florida defines inclusion as a student with a disability is getting their education in a gen ed setting. That gen ed setting should reflect natural proportions in age-appropriate heterogeneous groups in those core academics. Natural proportions means that the makeup of the classroom reflects the makeup of the community. So if 16% of the community are people with disabilities, learning disabilities, then 16% of the classroom should look that way, or 20%. It should reflect a natural, reasonable proportion. And then the heterogeneous groups, we're talking about a student being with their age-appropriate peers, not their grade level peers. So if a student with intellectual disabilities is reading on a fourth grade level but is in 10th grade, they're not spending time with fourth graders. They're spending time with 10th graders and working on material that's appropriate for their growth. The second part of this law is essentially this point is that a student with a disability is a person that we care about. And that is written in the state statute that a person with a disability is a valued member of the classroom and school community. So persons with IEPs are going on field trips. They are part of the lunch. They get this class t-shirt. They are part of honor roll, all of these things, the way that anyone else would be part of the school community. Teachers and administrators support universal education. That's an expectation. And they have the knowledge and support available to them to effectively teach all children. Universal education is exactly that. It means everybody gets an education. The end. And teachers and administrators supporting that and seeking out support for that is written into state statute as well. And finally, the last point of our Florida definition of inclusion is that there is access provided to the educators, access provided to technical assistance in best practices and educational methods that are, let me back up. The technical access, the technical support, what that means, it's not computer support, it is the technical details of what the current best practices are and what the Department of Education is prioritizing for learning. So I am technical assistance. If you have a question as a parent, if a teacher has a question and they can't find the answer to it, I can find the answer to it. If I don't know the answer, I will find the answer. And so I am the access that is provided by the state. And I'm not the only one. There's 25 of us in the state that do this job. But we want that access to it so that we can tailor everything to the needs of specific students, because we're talking about individual education. So all of these 4 points, this is what the state of Florida has deemed to be inclusion at this moment. It's written in state statute and the statute number is on the bottom. So if you're interested in looking up the state statute. So to be as clear as I possibly can be, inclusion is a civil right. All students deserve an education. Inclusion is a civil right for students with disabilities. And we want kids with their peers because the research shows that the outcomes for students working with their peers in a diverse, inclusive classroom will provide better outcomes, lifelong outcomes for these students. And then, so now is the research part. There's 40 years of research about inclusive education that show you that students with mild disabilities all the way to significant disabilities and significant intellectual disabilities, in inclusive settings, there's a lot of good that comes from this. The social and communication skills, also emotional skills. There's meaningful friendships that are developed. Participation and independence in the classroom. Students will make more progress on their IEP goals. Their academic achievement. Over and over again, research says that academic achievement is improved in an inclusive setting. Positive behaviors. Students with disabilities are in taking part in school activities more. And there's fewer absences, which I think is extremely important. We need our kids in school as many days as possible. In long run, they are better prepared for college and community living. When an inclusive classroom and when it's implemented with fidelity, every single person in that classroom benefits. And so when we say all, we mean all when we talk about inclusion. And in this way, all learners are benefiting by developing better attitudes and social skills. The teachers share effective strategies amongst each other, and the children benefit from that. When we have more than one teacher working for students, there's more collaboration and that comes down and that comes into the classroom, into the lessons. Schools report having positive student results on assessments. I know I said it, I'm gonna say it again because the research bears it out every single time. Um, Again, from 2020, this new research, inclusive education results in better academic outcomes. Um, and included students experience significantly greater growth in development of literacy skills than in their otherwise similar peers. That's from 2012. So what about my kids that don't have IEPs? What about my kids without learning disabilities? How are they impacted? Well, I'm here to tell you that they're impacted positively. They also benefit from academically providing support. We know that peer support is a very, very powerful tool that we use in the classroom. Students teaching each other is a wonderful way for them to process their learning, and it's effective as well. They develop friendships that can last a lifetime. I think, in my personal opinion, this is the third bullet point on this slide is so important that our students are becoming more and more prepared to succeed and work in workplaces with a diverse customer base, with diverse colleagues. We know that students with disabilities are living and working in our world, and our children are much more prepared to to work in that environment as well. Kids without disabilities or learners without disabilities, they gain an understanding of people with disabilities, and they learn to advocate for them. And they also support their peers by raising expectations in the classroom. It's it's a beautiful thing. So as a parent, there might be some concepts that are unfamiliar to you that I want to share with you as things to consider looking for in an educational environment. A lot of these things are buzzwords that I'm going to explain, and a lot of actually, I think I'm gonna all of them really go towards mindset. So the first concept to consider and look for or listen for is person first language. Person first language is a way to put the person before the disability, put the person before the label, put the person before the diagnosis. So there's a poster on the right side of the slide that gives you a couple of examples. So instead of saying a disabled person or a special needs child, we say a person with a disability. On the bottom, instead of saying he is ADHD or he's ADHD, we say he has ADHD. My student with ADHD. They are not their diagnosis. They are not their disability, unless they tell you otherwise. This right now is best practices. I do know that the deaf community, as a whole, wants to be referred to as a deaf person. That's called identity first. That is a very well-known, I guess, a well-known concept that they prefer to be identity first. So deaf people are the exception to this. And like I said, this is best practices. If anything, do call the student by their name, the name that their parents gave them, or the name they prefer. So that's person first language. The next concept is presumed competence. We use the terms presumed competence, and we also use the term least dangerous assumption. And I like to talk about least dangerous assumption because I think it's very powerful. A dangerous assumption is to say that kid can't read. That kid can't fill in the blank. That is dangerous to their learning. It's dangerous to mindset. So presuming competence is making sure that you're not saying something that you don't have absolute evidence of. Maybe they can't read in this moment. That's just this moment. They can't read yet. They're learning to read. So presuming competence and finding a different support if one's not working, finding a new way to give a student the access to the information, that's presuming competence. Maybe this didn't work, but something else will. It's like when you're fishing, and if you don't catch any fish today, go out and you're going to try to catch some fish tomorrow. Just change your bait, change your location, all of those things. That's my fishing metaphor. So presuming competence, you're looking for an environment for your learners that presumes they're competent. And I just kind of, started talking about this in the previous slide. Growth mindset. Growth mindset is very real. It's very much based in research. It is teaching ourselves, teaching our students that your mind is a muscle and that it grows with every failure. It grows with every mistake. It grows with every opportunity. And so that is where that term yet comes from. No, it's not where it comes from, but that's where we use it a lot. He just can't do it yet. I just can't do it yet. Because the more I try, the stronger I'll get, and the more likely I am to learn something. Growth mindset was around a lot of schools in the districts that I work in as part of the whole school theme. So you're always looking for people that have that growth mindset, and you want to see your learners come home with that growth mindset. These concepts are about how your students are accessing the curriculum or accessing the standards. So the first term is universal design for learning. And I mentioned that at the beginning. The ESSA, the General Education Federal Law, Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA mentions universal design for learning 15 times. So it's real, it's not going away. We call it UDL, and universal design comes from architecture. The ramp that you see on the screen right now, where the person with a wheelchair can use that's universal design, because not only wheels can use it, but feet can use it. Anyone can use that. So when you universally design your classroom for learning, you are preparing for all the needs before they're in the classroom. These buildings had to prepare for all the needs before the people came to the building. So an example is preparing for math manipulatives in your math classroom, even in a secondary setting as much as it is in a primary setting. Preparing for a student that might need a moment to calm down. Preparing for a learner that is gifted, that needs to have an enrichment project. Preparing for the needs of the students before they're in the room. So universal design for learning is proactive. And then we have the differentiation. Differentiation is reactive. This is after we get to know the students, after we know where their learning is, and then we can differentiate for them in the classroom, each lesson as they go. So if you hear those terms or if you see evidence of those things, that means you are in a place where teachers and teachers and administrators are working to include people. So this next little tidbit is, I think, important to know if you are, if you're a parent that has a student with an IEP. These two words, accommodations and modifications, they are sometimes used interchangeably, and it's important that you all know that they don't mean the same thing. In education, accommodations mean we are changing how a student accesses the information. So we're changed, like I said, using manipulatives, or this student in the image is using text that's in Braille. So he's still getting the same information. He's just using a different tool to get that information. Modifications are changing what the student is learning. Modifications we use when we're talking about students with intellectual disabilities that are using access point standards, which are the modified standards. And it's just important that you know what the words mean in case you're in a conversation where people are using them. In an inclusive classroom, you should see collaborative teaching, or sometimes it's called support facilitation. When your student is in a gen ed classroom, they get a second adult. They get an ESE teacher who is the strategy specialist, and a gen ed teacher who is the subject specialist. Those two teachers are responsible for collaborating and making plans and creating something called specially designed instruction for your learner. Specially designed instruction is what the ESE teacher has their expertise in, what your learner needs to help them grow, to help them access the information, or to meet those modified standards, depending on where your learner is. So having two teachers doesn't mean both teachers are always in the classroom at the same time, but both teachers are responsible for the learning of your child. If you're visiting a classroom, or you're hearing stories from your student, or you're at the football game and you want to know if inclusion is working, there's a few things to look for, and I'll go through them. Some things to keep an eye out for. If you see your child participating in the learning activities the same or similar with their same age peers that don't have disabilities. You see your classmates helping each other in their academics and other activities as well. Your student brings homework that gives him a chance to demonstrate their strengths and needs, as opposed to bringing homework that is too easy or extremely difficult and impossible to do. Your child's seat in the classroom or in the cafeteria or in all the places does not separate them from the students without disabilities. And their daily schedule is mostly in a gen ed classrooms, classes with their peers. It's also a good sign when your student is participating in clubs and after school sports, or anything that they want to participate in that's for all learners, not just students with disabilities. You know that the teacher or teachers, administrators, are committed to meeting the needs of all the diverse learners. The teachers, administrators celebrate accomplishments of all the kids. I was earlier mentioning everybody has an opportunity to get on honor roll. Everybody has an opportunity to have a citizenship award. Everybody has an opportunity to do something special, not based on disability or non-disability. If your student is speaking positively about someone in class or in their classes or someone at school, other students greet them and they like going to school. These are very clear evidence that inclusion is working. So what can you do? There's a few things you can do. Listening to your student is always a great place to start. Like I said, if they like going to school, if they like talking, if they can talk positively about some events or some people at school, that's working. What you can do is you can talk to your students' teachers or administrators and ask what you can do to help, what you can help, how you can help at home to help your child be included. Stay on top of their learning. I know in secondary there's a lot of things to juggle, but staying on top of all that is extremely important for success. Um, Read stories, watch movies, tell stories about your own friendships and your diversity and belonging and all of those things. Have real conversations about this. Um, Share ideas at school about what's helping at home. If your student has special behavior or special circumstances that are extremely unique to them that are new to the teachers, share what works. That's that's super helpful for teachers. Participate. Be a school citizen. Participate in school activities. Be present. Help other families. I think this is never said enough. Students, parents of students with disabilities don't know how much there is to learn about supporting your student with disabilities in education. And the more you learn and can share, the better it is for everybody. Everybody has different experiences. Everybody's learning from all sorts of different places. So share your knowledge to help other families. And then, of course, thank everyone. Thank people for working with your student. And that honestly goes for kids, for parents, kids with and without disabilities. Teachers love to be thanked. That's the truth. Um, so if there's something that stood out to you or something that you need more clarification on, I would love to hear from you. I gave my emails in the beginning of this, and I'll give them in a second. Want to show you some of the resources that are around the state and around the region and around your county that can support you if you haven't heard of them. Let's see. So the Florida Department of Education, their website, the Bureau of Exceptional Student Education, world of resources. There's a lot of projects, like my project, the Florida Inclusion Network. There's a lot of other projects that are dedicated to very specific needs, very specific disabilities. So we have CARD. CARD is for students with autism, kids with autism. And the Family Cafe is a place to go to get more resources. The Family Network on Disabilities. I know these are all these websites that are here that you can't click on, but I wanted to show you where you can find them. And then there's more. Because we are talking about secondary education, Project 10, which is the top left, project10.info, that is a transition education network. That's to support your learners going in out of high school and into the world. Getting an understanding of what kind of services are available for your kids, soon to be adults. Project Access is a project that is dedicated to writing the access point standards for learners. It's 3 people in the whole state that manage that. Positive behavior interventions, and there's visually impaired supports, supports for deaf students as well, and then training assistance, technical assistance and training systems. This is a screenshot of my website because we have 4 different, on this slide, 4 different pamphlets of family resources. I am happy to mail these to you if you would like them. You can also go to our website and download them. I have them in color, and I would mail them to you with pleasure. So that's the FloridaInclusionNetwork.com and /families if that's something that interests you. So here I am again. That's me, Leela. Leela Jenkins at contactfin.com. And I am happy to hear from any parents with any questions. And I think that's the end of what I have to say. So I appreciate all of you guys taking your time tonight to listen, to learn a little bit about what inclusion looks like. Thank you.